When Al and I were helping his parents move out of their home of 46 years, we found all kinds of little treasures. But the most powerful thing we found was a box of letters. And these letters dated from the 1940s. They were letters from a young soldier to his mom from Tokyo, Japan. Don Krummenacher, Al's dad, when he was 18, having never left the city of St. Louis, was sent off to be part of the occupation force in Japan at the end of World War II. And these letters that came from him, these letters that we have, really give a powerful window into the way he thought and what he experienced. Because you see, like every good American at the time, Dad had ingested a lot of propaganda about the Japanese people and about Japan. And to his amazement, when he got there, he wrote his mom and he said, "Mom, these people, they're really quite kind. These people, they've been so nice to us." And as you read the letters, you continue to see his fascination with the way life in Japan is nothing like he expected. And you also see that he begins to be concerned, a little concerned about how the Japanese people are being treated. Now, don't get me wrong, Don Krummenacher was a patriot and he did his part, but the truth is he had mixed feelings. And even in his 90s, he would not talk about his time in Japan. So those letters gave us a powerful window into the soul of an innocent 18-year-old boy who had a serious coming of age in World War II. That's how letters are. They can be like that. They can freeze a moment in time and they can save it for the future. They can change our perspective on the past. And sometimes they can even change the way we move into the future. A few minutes ago, you heard Katie and Wyatt and Stephen read that powerful passage from the New Testament, a passage I know that you've heard before. And I want to remind you, it is from a letter. 1 Corinthians is one of the 21 of 27 books in our New Testament that are letters. Letters, 21 out of 27. Letters have power, don't they? You've heard 1 Corinthians 13 read at so many weddings that you probably think of it as love poetry. It is beautiful, it is poetic, but the real power of 1 Corinthians 13 comes from being a letter written by a particular person to a particular church at a particular time. It was written to Corinth, which was a thriving, bustling port city with people from all over the Roman Empire. And that little church played a crucial role in spreading Christianity, translating it for the world. But according to the Apostle Paul, this little church had a problem. Large, disruptive, contentious factions arose in that church, the same factions that existed in the society around them. And those divisions threatened their life together and threatened the church's ability to live out and to share the gospel. So Paul writes them a letter. And this letter is meant to be a kind of blueprint, a blueprint to help this struggling infant church have an impact on the entire world. How is that going to happen? With love. Love that comes from mature faith. Love that comes from a heart tuned to the love of God. Love, as the Apostle Paul saw it, it was the only way forward. And friends, if we take it seriously, this letter is a blueprint for the life of the church today. And it's a blueprint for the public life of any Christian in our day, in our time as well. No one knew that better than Dr. King. And this is the weekend that we celebrate that great American prophet, Martin Luther King Jr. It's right to do so, to honor him for his contribution to the American experiment. for striving to make us a more perfect union, for his teaching, a teaching that I'm afraid we still haven't completely learned, that the constitutional dream that all are created equal is really still a dream for many people and in many places in America. But this morning, I want to let Dr. King speak to us as a man of faith, as the powerful Christian leader that he was. And that means I'm going to introduce you to a letter that Dr. King wrote for a particular time in a particular place in our history that still has power for the church and for Christians today. In April of 1963, right before Easter, the civil rights movement was at an important turning point in the state of Alabama. And the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, led by Dr. King, began to call attention to the continuing disregard for anti-segregation laws by the city government of Birmingham, Alabama. And they came to town. They came to town and led some peaceful protests that actually disrupted the commerce and the life of the city. It was a tense, difficult time. And it didn't bring out the best in law enforcement. It didn't bring out the best in the city government. And it didn't bring out the best in the white religious leaders of Birmingham, Alabama. Dr. King was arrested, as were many other leaders of that movement. He was put in prison where he sat for days, cut off from the outside world. And while he was there, the white religious leaders of Birmingham, Alabama, published an open letter in the city newspaper to the citizens, in particular to the black citizens of Birmingham, Alabama, suggesting that they refrain from any protests, suggesting that they trust their city government to do the right thing and to take care of their concerns in due time. Here's my favorite line from their letter. We recognize the natural impatience of people who feel that their hopes are slow in being realized. But we're convinced that these demonstrations are unwise and untimely. Unwise and untimely. Well, friends, calls for social justice and social change, they are never convenient or timely, are they? And in all honesty, I have to tell you that one of the 8 signers of this letter was the moderator of the Synod of Alabama of the Presbyterian Church, U.S., Edward Ramage. King's response, once he found out about this, he found out only because a newspaper was smuggled into him. His response was to write a letter of his own back to these 8 religious leaders. It had to be written on scraps of paper. They would not give him paper to write on, and it had to be smuggled out of the jail. It was addressed to those 8 religious leaders, but it never got sent to them. It simply got published in the newspaper under the title, A Letter from the Birmingham Jail. Now, friends, I can't overstate the power of this letter, its importance in the civil rights structure, the way it has inspired generations all over the world. Please, please read it or reread it as you celebrate this national holiday tomorrow. It's easy to find, just Google it. It's worth your time. But this morning, I want to concentrate on the power that this letter has to speak to the church and to faithful Christians. In a world that is still filled with hate and division, in a time when our public life still reels with inequity and injustice, at a moment in our nation when partisanship, the status quo, taking care of self and my tribe holds so much more sway than acting for the common good, Dr. King's letter still speaks and it still challenges. What are we called to do in a time like this? What does the gospel command? Here's what Dr. King writes. In the midst of a mighty struggle to rid our nation of racial and economic injustice, I have heard many ministers say, those are social issues with which the gospel has no real concern. I felt that the white ministers, priests, and rabbis of the South would be among our strongest allies, but instead, some have been outright opponents, refusing to understand the freedom movement and misrepresenting its leaders, and all too many others have been more cautious than courageous and have remained silent behind the anesthetizing security of stained glass windows. So often the contemporary church is a weak, ineffectual voice with an uncertain sound. So often it is an arch defender of the status quo. Far from being disturbed by the presence of the church, the power structure of the average community is consoled by the church's silent and often even vocal sanction of things as they are. And finally, but the judgment of God is upon the church as never before. If today's church doesn't recapture the sacrificial spirit of the early church, it will lose its authenticity, forfeit the loyalty of millions, and be dismissed as an irrelevant social club with no meaning for the 20th century. Every day I meet young people whose disappointment with the church has turned into outright disgust. 60 years ago, friends, but it could be written today. I know, like most large, diverse Protestant churches in America, we don't want to mix politics with our piety. I know that we don't come here to church to hear a political or social agenda. I know that. I've been a minister for a long time. I know that. But I also know Scripture. And I also know the life and the teaching of Jesus. And I believe that the church and faithful Christians should speak into America's public life with a voice informed and led by Christ. Christ, who said, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice, for they shall be satisfied." Christ, who said, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for the sake of justice, theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Christ, who said, "Woe to you, Pharisees, because you tithe, but you neglect justice and the love of God." And Christ, who said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and strength and mind, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself." You see, friends, it comes down to love, doesn't it? Love, real, powerful, world-altering love that flows from the cross into the life of the church and the lives of those who believe in Jesus, not for our own enjoyment and not for our own salvation, but for the sake of the world. And for God's sake, let's not water down the love that Jesus is speaking of, the love Paul wrote about, the love Dr. King preached. This isn't some kind of pleasant feeling or romantic tingle or slight affection. No, this love is powerful. It is strong. It can change the world. This love comes from God, and in faithfulness, it tries to emulate God. And this love responds to suffering, all kinds of suffering. This love responds to suffering with charity, which is a good thing, seeking to heal the wounds of the world, seeking to meet human needs. Nothing wrong with that. But this love also responds to suffering by fighting for justice, seeking to end the social structures that created the human need and suffering in the first place. Dr. King put it like this: we're called to play the Good Samaritan on life's roadside, but that will be only an initial act. One day, the whole Jericho road must be transformed so that men and women will not be beaten and robbed as they make their journey through life. True compassion is more than flinging a coin at a beggar. It understands that an edifice that produces beggars needs restructuring. Honestly, we're more comfortable with charity than with justice, aren't we? Sure we are. Because discussing justice puts us squarely into politics, into issues like immigration, the social safety nets, public education, health care, the rights and freedoms of LGBTQ plus people, environmental inequities. And are we really prepared to say that these are not issues of concern for the gospel? I'm not. Because the God of Scripture that I know is love. And the gospel, as I understand it, is the story of how Jesus lived out that love and calls us into that love. Love in private and love in public. Love in the church and love outside of the church. And friends, whether we like it or not, whether we want to get involved in politics or not, let's not fool ourselves. Justice is the way love looks in public. Justice is the way love looks in public. In 1959, when Dr. King was still pastor of this beautiful historic church, Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama, he preached about this kind of love to his congregation. His sermon was based on 1 Corinthians 13, and he ended his sermon like this. Hear his words. Dr. King preached, "I still believe that love is the most durable power in the world. This principle stands at the center of the cosmos. God is love. The one who knows love is a participant in the being of God, and the one who hates does not know God. So you may master the intricacies of the English language. You may possess all of the eloquence of articulate speech. You may even speak with the tongue of an angel, but if you don't have love, you're a noisy gong. You're a tinkling cymbal. You may have the gift of prophecy and understand all mystery. You may boast of your great institutions of learning, your boundless degrees, but all of this amounts to absolutely nothing void of love. But even more, you may give your goods to feed the poor. You may give great gifts to charity. But if you have not love, it means nothing. You may even give your body to be burned. You may die the death of a martyr. Your spilt blood may be a symbol of honor for generations yet unborn. Thousands may praise you as history's supreme hero. But even so, if you do not have love, your blood was spilt in vain. Without love, benevolence becomes egotism. Martyrdom becomes spiritual pride. So the greatest of all virtues is love. It is here that we find the true meaning of Christian faith. It is at bottom the meaning of the cross. The great event on Calvary signifies more than a meaningless drama that took place on the stage of history. It is a telescope through which we look out into the long vista of eternity and see the love of God breaking forth into time. It is the eternal reminder to a power-drunk generation that love is the most durable power in the world and that it is at bottom the heartbeat of the moral cosmos. Whew. Thanks be to God for love that bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. And friends, as we face this new year and all the challenges it will bring to our public life, let us remember our call to love, love that seeks justice and that never ends.